Hello, good afternoon. Hope I'm audible okay. Perfect, thank you. It's going to be an exciting session. Welcome to WIN302, Migrating Microsoft Applications to AWS like an expert. I'm joined today with my colleague Rahul Kulkarni, who is a partner solution architect. I'm Giriraj Daga, solution architect working with large enterprise customers. And I'm thrilled to have Will Everett, who's from Pacific, part of 7 West Media, who's traveled all the way from Australia to share his interesting story of how they migrated how they migrated from Azure to AWS, a key part of the .NET application. And I can see already they love their .NET, and he's got an interesting T-shirt. So I'm sure we're going to have fun, Will.
Yes, to be clear, this actually says cool as F#, C#, not the other thing you were thinking.
Can't wait to hear more. So, AWS supported Microsoft workloads for over a decade. We're the first cloud platform where Windows Server was supported back in 2008. And since then, a lot of customers, hundreds and thousands of customers, have deployed their business critical applications, Exchange, Active Directory, SharePoint on AWS. And I think while most customers still identify the increased business agility as a key driver for them to migrate to AWS, but they find a lot of value and on the foundational benefits like just higher reliability, improved performance, and more choice to be able to meet their business goals faster. So while we find that there are a lot of motivations on why customers migrate their Microsoft workloads on AWS, but we often get now asked this question, how can I do it quickly? So for this session, what we decided was we'll focus mostly on the how part, not the why part. So how can you do it quickly, migrate at large scale your Microsoft workloads on AWS? So our goal today is that in the next 1 hour, we give you methods, means, ways that you can take back and see how you can simplify large-scale migrations of Microsoft workloads on AWS. We usually find customers are on tight budget, tight timelines. This is a double bubble when you're doing the migration, so you want the complexities kicks in. So we will share with you ways in which you can simplify large-scale migrations of maybe multiple data centers. And we see that another part of the journey is to be doing it confidently. And it could be an iterative process where you do it in multiple phases. So that's where automation helps. So we'll share some tips and tricks on how can you automate and build repeatable architecture with best practices. And in the end, we're hoping that you take away an actionable plan of what you can do, go back, talk to your team, talk to your stakeholders in the organization, and build a plan of moving ahead with Microsoft workloads on AWS. I love this slide. This reminds me of my 4-year-old, where things are always where they're not supposed to be, like the propeller head. This is a disclaimer that this is a level 300 session, and we're not all in the same journey, same stages of our journey on AWS. Some of you might have already deployed a lot of Microsoft workloads on AWS, maybe here to learn more about the best practices, how can you do things differently. There could be others who are just dipping their toes and are on the verge to get started, and they want to know how to do it better or how to do it by learning from the battle scars of the past. So what we try to, as we try to juggle these expectations, we try to cover areas that could hopefully add to everyone's expectations and give you something valuable for your time. But we request your patience. At some places we might go too deep, and some places we might go broad. But we assure you there's a lot of show and tell demo, and there's a lot of build outs. So hopefully it's fun and you enjoy your time here. And we also have a lot of small like links in the presentation. So if you want to take your phone out, click the pictures, you can do that. And otherwise the slides will be available on SlideShare, and the recorded session will be also on YouTube. So with that, let's just jump right in. So this is a company, Unicorn Shop. Their vision is to enable everyone who desires to become a unicorn to look like one. When I first showed this slide to Will, he said, wow, you guys have them in Bombay? I said, they might be in Australia too, and you never know, you can find them in Mandalay Bay. I was just making it up. It's a fictitious company. But they're doing great. They have an e-commerce offering where you can buy, I hear, cool glasses, maybe even unicorn wings if you fancy them. But what they have built is that they're built on top of a lot of legacy environment. So they have, and they're very invested in Microsoft technology. So they have .NET based store front end applications. They have CMS applications. They have, their emails are hosted in Office 365. And, but of late, like many other customers, they're finding it difficult to just keep the lights on. While a significant part of their budget is diverted towards keeping the lights on, but it hardly remains on. It's flickering. And at the same time, the developers are frustrated because while there is a lot of business demand and growth, they're not able to unlock those opportunities and ideas and deliver things faster because it takes a lot of time to get new hardware and also adopt new technologies. So while these are common, one other thing now is becoming important for them is that as more digital business is becoming part of their core business, digital services, it's very important. Any outages that in previous years would not have been noticed or got that much attention is not the same now. If the core part of the business is relying on making 24/7 availability to their end customer, they have to be up. They have to be highly performing, and as the business is growing, business wants to go into different markets, maybe try different models, brick and mortar stores. They have to remain agile and innovate. So they realize they're not there yet, and they need a strong foundation where they can differentiate themselves and create cutting edge, competitive edge. And that's when they've started a IT transformation journey of many years, and they've chosen AWS to build it. So while they started this journey, they were thinking about whether should I build only cloud native apps on AWS? Should I just start new and leverage the serverless containers technologies and only build that? Or is there value in migrating what I already have? And they found that, talking to many other customers, that even just the higher reliability, everything fails all the time, but ability to recover fast, build more fault tolerant applications, and just highly performing application all the time is also a lot of value in itself and gives a lot of dev productivity. So those things can be unlocked, and it could start their journey on AWS where they lift and shift what they already have, and at the same time position for modernization, whether it's adding personalization services, analytics, or just reacting faster to their business demand. And with that, I'd like to invite Rahul to show you a glimpse of how they did it.
Hi everyone, my name is Rahul. I'm a solutions architect at AWS. Can't hear me? Okay, thank you. All right, so what I'm showing you right now before I get started with the entire migration demo is the current environment that Unicorn Shop has, right? They're running Hyper-V, right, with these VMs. You can notice that a few of the VMs are off, and I'll tell you why when we come to the end of the demo, right? So when you get started with the migration journey, the first thing that you would want to do is to plan your migration, right? And the only way you can plan your migration is when you have the data, right? What kind of applications are running on it? What are the interdependencies between the applications, right? So we have a service. AWS has a service called as the Application Discovery Service, right? This is an agent-based or an agent-less service that can be deployed on your on-premise environment. Now, I've deployed the Application Discovery Service agents on the virtual machines about 20 days back. So it's been collecting a lot of data, and it's going to help me plan the entire migration. Let's have a look at the data that has been collected. Now, the Application Discovery Service is tightly integrated with the Migration Hub, right? Migration Hub is your single I would say pane of glass throughout your entire migration. It helps you discover applications, it helps you plan your migration, and it also helps you track your migration, right? So these are all the servers that you saw in the Hyper-V environment also listed here. This is because the agents on those servers are sending the data. let's have a look at the data that the servers have sent out, right? So this is one of the graphs that I've built out on Amazon QuickSight, our visualization service. This is the utilization chart, right? So on the x-axis is the server names. You can see server 1, server 2, server 8. On the y-axis is the utilization of memory. You can see that server 1 and server 4 have a pretty high utilization, whereas the other servers are underutilized. I think the same with the CPU utilization as well. Server 4 and server 1 are pretty well utilized, whereas others are not. These graphs or this data is very important to right-size your environment on AWS, because that's how you get the best value when you run on AWS. That is one of the aspects. The other aspects with respect to planning is what are the dependencies between the application. So let me flip over to another chart that I built using the data. This is the app to server map. As you can see, on the x-axis is the servers, on the y-axis are the application IDs. So I have 3 applications running. Application 1 is running on server 8 and server 11. Okay, application 2 is running on server 3, and application 3 is running on server 5. So this gives me a knowledge of, okay, what application is running where. But I also need to understand the dependencies between the servers and the applications. So this chart, which I built using the data that we have, tells me, okay, what are the ports that are being used? So for example, server 8 talks to server 4 on port 455. Now 455, if you know, is the SMB protocol. So that means server 8 is talking to a file share there. Server 4 is like a file share. Server 7 talks to server 8 over port 1433. And this is like a heat map, so it tells you how active it is, right? So these are all the graphs that you can build, and helps me identify what are the 3 dependencies and how can I plan my migration. Now, using this data that I have, I go back to Migration Hub and I specify the applications. So I've identified 3 applications. I have a SharePoint that runs on premises, right? In fact, all of them run on premises. I have a file share, and I have a CMS storefront, which is a .NET application that runs a SQL Server backend. Now, once I've had these applications, the next thing I can do is, before I forget, right, the discovery tools are not just limited to the discovery tools that I mentioned. You can also import data from any other discovery tool that you have. The second thing is the target right sizing, right? So if you look at the utilization, based on the utilization reports, I can determine what should be the size of my AWS environment for all the servers that were running in my Hyper-V. I just downloaded a report. Let me just show that to you. So you can see that there are all the servers that are listed here, and the recommendation based on utilization is C5 X large. We saw that server 4 was kind of utilized pretty high, so it's been recommended to use as C4 X large. Server 8, which was underutilized, is C5 X large. That's because it's been downsized. It's not being used as much as it should. Now, these are the recommendations that the Migration Hub provides you. Now, next step is to actually go and plan and migrate, right? So I have the applications here, right? And if I go to the migration tab, I can build out this chart, or this becomes my single dashboard to track my migration. Since I'm running SharePoint, I want to do a lift and shift. I want to use a tool that is simple enough that will just replicate the blocks and help me get out of my data center as quickly as possible. So I use a tool called as Cloud Endure, which basically replicates the data as blocks and is available on AWS. How do I set up Cloud Endure? So in the setup, first thing I would need to do is actually set up the access key and my credentials there. Now, this is required to actually, this helps Cloud Endure not only replicate the data, but also launch the target instances on AWS. The next thing is the replication settings, right? The replication settings talks about what is my source, what is my target, which region on AWS, what are the subnets where the data is going to be replicated, which kind of disks that I want to use. Now, these subnets are actually created in accounts that is being provisioned using Control Tower. And we'll cover Control Tower, which is one of the fastest way to set up your accounts and networking a little later, right? So once I have these replication settings in place, the next thing I do is start replication. The way I start replication is I download an agent to that particular VM, and it starts replicating by itself. So if you look at the source was server 7. The first thing it tells me is what are the applications that are running on server 7. And you can see SharePoint here, right? And WCF services and other tools. The next thing it tells me, the next thing I need to configure is a blueprint. The blueprint helps me decide what is the target EC2 instance that I need to launch this SharePoint server as. Now, since I'm replicating with the operating system and the SharePoint licenses, I can use the dedicated host. This is one of the mechanisms using which you can actually bring your licenses onto AWS, and we'll cover that in a bit. Now, once I save this blueprint, there are two ways I can launch the instance, one in test mode and the other one is the cutover mode. So test mode is helping me test the application once it's replicated all the blocks to see if everything is fine. And once I'm fine, I can go into the cutover mode where, you know, I'm good to go for production. So that's what I've done, and you can see that these are the three, I would say, VMs which were there on my on-premise environment, which were switched off, which are right now running on AWS. And let me just open up server 7, which is the web front end, right? So this is the URL of the SharePoint, and I'm going to enter the Active Directory domain which I used on-premise. And the way I'm able to log in is because I've established trust between the on-premise Active Directory and the managed Active Directory I have in my account. Using this, I'm able to use the same credentials. So let me just go ahead and log in and see if it works out. And you can see SharePoint has been completely replicated, and with the existing Active Directory authentication that I can use on premises. So this is the power of Cloud Endure. Within a few clicks, you'll be able to replicate and launch your on-premise instances. I just want to show one last demo with respect to another tool that we launched. So this tool is perfect for operators who are managing web servers. And one of the things that Unicorn Shop's management requested was try to move into a managed environment so that, you know, the undifferentiated heavy lifting of managing servers and patching, right, is taken off, and so that you can focus on something more productive. So we've just launched a new tool which helps operators actually migrate ASP.NET websites which are running on IIS. So you look at this ASP.NET website which is on server 3, right? This is the storefront application. And this is the site, right? You can see this server3.unicornshop.lol.com. This is the on-premise environment which is there. Now, this tool is a PowerShell tool. So I have run it, and what it does is it packages the on-premise IIS environment and its dependencies and migrates it to Elastic Beanstalk. Now, before this, I've also migrated the database itself. And since the management required a managed environment, I've replicated the database to RDS using a tool called as Database Migration Services. Now, at the end of this, right, this tool which actually migrates the database gives me an endpoint. Let me just hit the endpoint to see if my database has been migrated properly or not. Not just my database, but my application as well. And it does, right? So this is running on Elastic Beanstalk and in a completely managed environment so that the folks at Unicorn Shop can focus on something that is productive and leave the undifferentiated heavy lifting to AWS. And that's the end of the demo. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. That was crisp. So what you just saw was a combination of few services to discover data that's there in your environment, use Migration Hub, which in itself doesn't cost anything but helps you to track everything together, and used Cloud Endure as a tool to migrate the Microsoft SharePoint application, as well as another tool which we'll go through. We'll share the links on how you can do it yourself. It's available on GitHub. So that helps to migrate an existing ASP.NET website into a managed Elastic Beanstalk service. So you may ask, so that's great, you did migration, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. How about licensing and the cost? How does that work out? So when it comes to Microsoft products, your current licensing models can easily dictate your cloud infrastructure solutions. And we provide a lot of options for the customers to select what works best for them. Many of times I have discussion with customers who find value in the pay-as-you-go price for compute, and they say, for my Elastic workloads, I want the same for the licenses. If it's my horizontally distributed, like if I'm scaling out my web servers or my API servers, and I'm scaling back in, that's perfect fit for license included model, where I'm not only paying for the compute, but for the license also in pay for whatever I use. But then I may have steady state workloads, and I may already have investments done on premises for license that I want to bring over to stretch my investment. And for that, we have dedicated hosts. How it works is products with active software assurance and license mobility benefits, like example SQL Server, can be deployed with software assurance, can be deployed on either the shared tenancy or the dedicated host. But the other products which are not eligible for license mobility, for example Windows Server or SQL Server without SA, and if they were purchased on or before October 1st, you can bring them over on dedicated host. And that is a very compelling and cost-effective option for a lot of Microsoft workloads, where you want to reuse the licenses that you already have. And we'll go over that in a few minutes. So we've been supporting BYOL on dedicated hosts since 2015. Last year, we announced License Manager that made it easier for you to even be compliant with your licenses. This service has been adopted very fast, and it's very popular with customers because it helps you to avoid violations of your licensing license consumption. For example, if you had 48 cores of license of SQL Server, you start the year with 48, and you find that later in the year more instances have been launched, and you need to do a true up and get more, you need to order more licenses. But using License Manager, you can map the rules of your enterprise agreement into configurations, and then at the launch, when you're launching an instance, you can restrict that it is not, you can prevent it to be launched if it exceeds if you've already exhausted your available licenses. So what that means is that your true up times or your audit will be quite fast, because everything is available in a single dashboard where you can see what's compliant and not, and you have an option. You can either enforce that it doesn't get launched, or you can say I just want to have detective controls so that I can go and figure out why more instances were launched. And this year this has been made a lot easier. The management experience of working with License Manager with dedicated host has been significantly enhanced. Sandy Carter mentioned this a couple of days back in her keynote, that now you can create a host resource group and associate that with License Manager. So what were the challenges with dedicated host before? You had to allocate the dedicated host, and in each family of dedicated host you could only have a particular instance type. That did not feel like a EC2 experience, which has now been modified. So now you can have the same EC2-like experience with dedicated host. If you get an R5 family, you can have an R5X large and R5 2X large on the same dedicated host. And what more, you can leave it to AWS to manage it for you. So depending on the configuration you set on the host resource group, it can automatically allocate dedicated host or release the dedicated host when it's not required. So quick illustration, let's say if you had a C5 dedicated host, you launched an X large instance, now you launched another 2X large instance. Because the space is available, it'll place the instance on the same host, and you don't have to do that by yourself. Maybe you expand and you get M5, C5, R5 families, and the same thing will happen. And as you start terminating, it terminates, let's say M5 4x large, it will take away from the second host, and then it still runs the host because you're still running M5x large. But if you terminate M5x large, that goes away. And now this is available, this can be released based on the settings that you've set. So it will automatically be released, so you'll not be paying for that. So this way, it gives you the same EC2-like experience on dedicated host. At the same time, you can stretch your investments in your licenses. So while dedicated host is great for BYOL workloads, there are other ways in which you can optimize cost. Many times manual assessments don't give you complete and accurate information on how much resource consumption is there on the instances. So if you do the right sizing of instances, meeting the performance that you need, for meeting the same performance of your application, what's the resources that you need on AWS? Selecting the right instance type. We have a lot of choices of instance types. Databases consume a lot of memory. They work better on the memory optimized instances like R5, i3, Z1D. Most other workloads are on balanced workloads. You can run it on M5. And many customers find, Zero is one customer who's talked about it, that instead of having big servers, they started using a lot of small servers because that gave them a lot of value in scaling out and scaling in and became more cost effective. So they use a lot of T2 and T3 small instances for variable workloads. So like that, there are many options, and AWS team can come and help you optimize licenses costs. So, and we also have tools like TSO Logic, which can help you understand the impact of moving Microsoft workloads on AWS. And typically, we find that it offers you about 36% savings if you otherwise do it yourself. So, and it now aligns very well with the savings plan that we recently launched as one more pricing model beyond spot, on demand, and reserved instance. So there's a lot of options where you can really make it cost effective to run Windows workloads on AWS. So talk to your AWS team, and they can hopefully support you in that endeavor. So there's more information on these links if you want to get more information, find out more. So many times we get asked, with the benefit of hindsight, what can you tell us that we can use to go fast and safe? So what we found is that there are a lot of generic things, like you just know what's there in your environment, know what's your roadmap like, what's your technical application versus strategic applications, but more importantly, set up a landing zone for scale. And what it means is that lay a strong foundation for a multi-account, multi-VPC architecture, which is automated, includes your safety guardrails as part of the automated process, so that when you want to add more workloads, it's easier for you to sell it internally. And that's what we want to talk about. So easiest way to set up multi-account, multi-VPC architecture with best practices on AWS is Control Tower. It helps you set up an automated account vending machine, and the new account that come up have the guardrails. They adhere to the, let's say if you set up a common logging account, that all the logs, VPC Cloud Trail, VPC flow logs, they all get centralized into one account. So for existing as well as new account, it will all come to one S3 bucket in a common logging account, which can have your SIEM tool or your InfoSec access to that, where it cannot be tempered or deleted. So those guardrails and controls are already set up. So now when you launch a new account, it already adheres to that. Many things like that is simplified through that AWS Control Tower. So if we go back to one of the common starting points in Microsoft workloads is Active Directory. So how do we take this multi-account architecture to set up through Control Tower and build an architecture for, so common thing will be a shared services account. There are a lot of things in a Microsoft environment like DNS servers, Active Directory, key management that is common across the entire organization. You want to create a shared services account or a VPC where you can host your managed Active Directory, set up trust with your on-premises Active Directory, and maybe either use ADFS if you're already doing federation with Office 365, or use SSO as a service if you don't want to manage instances in your account. There's a lot of deep dive sessions that happened this week, which talks, there's complete deep dive on Active Directory, SQL Server. So these are some topics which I'm glossing over, but if you want to know different patterns and how to do it, definitely recommend to watch those sessions. One of the common scenarios with Microsoft workloads is how do you manage multiple DNS services. So when you have on-premises, you have DNS service mapped to the part of your Active Directory. Same way when you launch and manage Active Directory on cloud, AWS, there's also a DNS service. But everything that you launch in AWS gets resolved through Route 53. So when you have these multiple services, how do you make all of these seamlessly work together? And that is supported by two features in Route 53, a resolver endpoint and conditional forwarder. So if you take advantage of those two, you can, as your DNS queries originating from on-premises can resolve an hosted domain on AWS through the resolver endpoint, and any outbound queries from the VPC for an on-premises domain can be forwarded. A conditional forwarder rule can be added to Route 53 resolver, which forwards it to the on-premises DNS. So this way, you can have a seamless operation of whatever workloads when you work in a hybrid environment. And this also is supported through a share. It can be shared across multiple accounts. So you can put this rules of DNS rules conditional forwarder in a shared services account, and then using resource access manager, share it with other workload accounts. So that way you don't have to repeat it multiple times, and you can centralize that. So after Active Directory, one of the common backend for Microsoft Shop will be a SQL Server. You have options to move to EC2 or RDS, and the methods are either you do a full backup restore if you have tolerance for downtime, or you could use native SQL Server methods for, let's say, mission critical workload. For example, if you have SQL Server 2016 and above, this is a very popular method with a lot of our customers. I have there's one customer in India who did that for a SaaS product where they didn't have control on the end consumer, and so they set up a availability group on premises and another secondary availability group on AWS. They started replicating it and could use validate the data on the secondary availability group, and when they were ready, they could just force failover from the primary availability group to the secondary availability group, which is a native method separated from SQL Server that allows you to do a very minimal downtime migration, and it's a very popular way of doing application migration. Lastly, if you are looking at replatforming to RDS, you can use DMS service, which helps you to do homogeneous as well as heterogeneous migrations. One thing I'll just call out on SQL Server, many times you get an instance type. There are fixed instance types on AWS, so you may get more cores than you need, and because you're paying by the cores, you may have to incur additional cost. But there is a feature called optimizing CPU, where you can control the number of active vCPU on an instance. So if you, for example, if you launch 16 core machine, because of the RAM that it has, and you need that, but you only need 8 cores, you can, at the launch time, you can say I only need 8 active vCPU. That means you only need to bring in license equivalent of 8 vCPUs, not 16, and that's a very powerful way to control the cost of your SQL licenses on AWS. This is an eye chart. I don't expect to go through or you to read it, but I'll leave it here for reference. It helps you map it, which methods work with what target service. This is also a service that was launched last year, SMB compliant, fully managed file storage service. It's becoming, it's one of the very fastly adopted services as well, and you can migrate your on-premises file shares using maybe simple tools like Robocopy, where metadata and the file data is transferred to FSX, and then you don't have to worry about the underlying management of a typical file share. So you can maintain a highly available environment, and now as of this week, it also supports deduplication. So typically, that can also help you to make it a really cost-effective option as you want to re-platform your shared file storage services. So with that, before I go into maybe a lot of the application migration strategies, I wanted to hear from Will what has been their journey of migrating to AWS.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. You
Okay.
can come, let's go there.
Ours is a fairly simple and quick story, but incredibly epic for us because it was like a real game changer for our business. So yeah, basically in terms of our journey, so for Pacific magazines, as was mentioned, it's a part of 7 West Media. In the mid-noughties, all of our digital assets went into Yahoo, and then we got them back effectively 10 years later. So we call that the lost decade. So it's very uncommon for a kind of a major publisher not to be in control of their own kind of destiny. So that was a really big thing for us. You know, pretty much within a kind of a very short space of time, once we'd actually received those kind of digital properties back. So, you know, some of the iconic brands that were actually across, the likes of, you know, Better Homes and Gardens, InStyle, Marie Claire, etc. We had like a 2 or 3 month period to launch all of these sites in. So it was a fairly rapid deployment. Thank you. And effectively, our kind of initial architecture, if you like, it was based on a managed Azure web environment. And what we actually experienced initially with that is that we were having issues with things like page speed, and we were also experiencing some instability issues. So we needed a kind of a stopgap just to keep up with the growth of the business. So how we addressed that, we did effectively a reverse proxy, and what we got there is we put in front the cloud front CDN. So that kind of bought us a bit of time. But, you know, we had continued rapid audience growth. So year on year, it was about kind of 70%. And that actually meant our infrastructure started to get wobbly again. Now, that was great for our audience strategy. Our audience strategy was working really well. But on the flip side of that, what started to happen, we started to have outages. Our consumer engagement, the user engagement started to reduce. And this also started to kind of decrease our SEO authority. And we kind of all knew where this was going to lead us to, apart from getting fired, of course, was impacting our digital revenue. And this was a key growth part of our business. So, you know, some of the kind of key reasons why we chose Amazon ECS, I guess one thing we knew is that our digital growth was going to continue to grow rapidly, and you know, there was an urgent requirement that we obviously needed high availability, but also resilience. Now, we wanted to make the right choice for, you know, to future-proof. So we were also thinking about, you know, our future agility, automation, and efficiency. And we had worked on a couple of our kind of e-commerce sites with AWS. So really a key reason of why we went down this path was really our kind of partnership and confidence, not only in AWS, but also the AWS solution provider who helped us on this journey, who was Kablamo. So initially, kind of, you know, what we were targeting as part of this was, first of all, agility. So we were getting the faster builds and deployments, the automation. So we had the blue-green deployment in infrastructure. So infrastructure as code. We had efficiencies. So, we made significant cost savings in all of this because, there were various sites that were just growing exponentially, and we were just having to go kind of extra large all the time for those instances, and we didn't have the flex. But also visibility, that kind of detailed monitoring and analysis gave my engineers that next level of detail to understand kind of what we needed. So this was kind of like the post-migration architecture. And really from the way we migrated, we effectively did it as a site at a time. So we effectively froze kind of content publishing and just did each site step by step. So we started off with a bit of a canary, a site that had a bit of the lower traffic, and really because we are in such kind of, there was so much urgency, we then hit the big sites that were getting the big traffic straight away. And with our kind of solution partner, Kablamo, they basically upskilled our own internal staff. So even though they helped kind of map out the roadmap and the strategy, once then we got to the kind of the ongoing rollout, our team were upskilled enough to basically complete those rollouts. So yeah, pretty much kind of flicked over, and throughout the course of all of this, we had no downtime, and that was over a dozen sites that we kind of migrated in that process. And as mentioned, we did do the blue-green deployments for our continuous delivery as well. So I guess, how did the migration help us to with AWS? I think one of the biggest things is just confidence. We now have the confidence that with the future of growth of our business, with kind of just even from a load perspective, when the audience load is increases or decreases, we now have the confidence in the platforms that we can use auto scale to handle those situations. And we were kind of lucky in a way because it was not shortly after we had completed the last migration. We actually had a DDoS attack, and that generated an extra 500% kind of traffic onto one of our sites. Some of the editorial team got really excited. They thought they'd released a big news story, but no, it wasn't that. But what it did prove is that, we are ready now with our platforms for the future and for the future kind of growth that we've got planned. So I guess, what's next for Pacific? So, we feel this is kind of one of our first steps in our agile journey. We still need more kind of agility in our products and services. So, this is where we kind of see it's critical building out more microservices. So whether that's kind of containerized with AWS Fargate or serverless with kind of Amazon PI or Lambda. Now, a big part of that is, we're always, because it's media, whether it's Apple News, Facebook Instant Article, or even Apple News Plus, there's always a new kind of media channel that we're having to get to. And to be competitive, it's who can get there quickest and build up that kind of extra reach and audience. So for us, decoupling our kind of content publishing away from our content display is also critical. So we're aiming that. So as part of our kind of product roadmap for 2020, we're looking to build out that content API and again, just get that greater flexibility in our stack. Also, again, that focus on staying ahead of the competitors. We're also looking at kind of content personalization using AWS machine learning, and we're also looking to use Alexa for our voice services as well. So that's really our journey, and we do feel like this now. We're on AWS. So
Thanks, Will.
no worries.
Really glad to- Thank you. That's a good testimony of how once you don't have to worry about the infrastructure and you have a more fault-tolerant, immutable infrastructure, you can focus and divert your energy toward building your differentiation. So glad and looking forward to what more you do on the platform. So at a high level, application migration strategies could be like one of three things. If you really want something to move fast, you can do rehost, and that also delivers value. We'll look at that. And if you can containerize your application, that's where you can start utilizing a bit of cloud economics like DevOps, immutable infrastructure, and benefits of releasing features faster. And more importantly, you can also start to refactor slowly and gradually at your own pace to more modernization benefits. And same way, if you have already built any event-driven .NET Core based applications, you can directly go to Lambda or serverless functions and build more cloud native applications, or this could be your target. Microsoft has already announced the next version of .NET is .NET Core, which is cross-platform. So that works on both Windows and Linux, and that helps again customer have the choice of where they want to deploy their application. And so anything new that you're building, hopefully that's on .NET Core. So when you look at the rehost challenges in a large enterprise or a big organization, you could have maybe physical servers, virtual servers, different versions of operating system, different versions of ISV solution, COTS applications. You always so that increases the complexity of migration. While Rahul showed you a demo of Cloud Endure, we'll look at what are the other services that can help you do this kind of migration, and I'll go deep dive on Cloud Endure in a minute. So one way to do that is through Cloud Endure, because Cloud Endure works on block level replication. So that way it has support for, it doesn't matter what's the operating system or the application. So it takes that complexity out, and it's a fully automated orchestrated solution that helps you to migrate any application, and it can be a migration or a DR solution. But let's say you're looking, Cloud Endure requires an agent to be installed on every VM or every server that you're trying to replicate. But if you can't do that, then AWS Server Migration Service can be another alternate option, which is an agentless option to create snapshot of your VMs regularly at repeated intervals, puts it in S3, creates an AMI, and then you can build a CloudFormation template, tag it to get the latest AMI, and launch an environment based on that. So that creates one more option for you. And the other option is through marketplace products. We have a very rich ecosystem of technology partners who have built products to solve these problems, and they do their job pretty well as well. Like River Meadow can be used for even replatforming your Windows 2003 or 2008 instances to a more newer Windows operating system. So rehost and replatform, they support both. So just going a little bit deep on the Cloud Endure part, it provides you a very robust, predictable, non-disruptive continuous replication. So it's got three key parts. Get to that. So it's got one multi-tenant SaaS console that you can integrate with any of your access management applications. Second part is the agents that get installed on the source servers. Third part is the replication servers, where small size servers with low cost storage options like HDD is created, which helps to just replicate your on-premises source servers on AWS. And at your given, when you're ready, as Rahul showed you, if you remember the test mode and the cutover mode, during that time you launch instances from this environment onto a target subnet or a blueprint that you've created. Blueprint could be a complex blueprint or a simple thing as VPC subnets and instance IDs. So what it's actually also doing, if you see here, the cloud, it's a machine converter, because you've got the blocks, but you also have to get the hypervisor level drivers, let's say the specific drivers for AWS. So it's doing all that conversion and then launching an instance in your target subnet, making it available for you to access your application. And from a security perspective, all the control plane, command and control, is done through over HTTPS 443 port, and if you have any proxies in your environment, it supports that as well. The replication happens over TCP 1500 port, where you control the traffic. Everything is encrypted in transit, and also you can use KMS keys to encrypt the EBS volumes in the staging area. So it's also fault tolerant against network failures. That's very important. The agent is installed in a non-disruptive way. It doesn't require any restart of your source servers. It works in the memory. It doesn't use local cache, and it has pointers to the blocks that it is replicated. So even if there's a network interruption, it can go back to the point where the last block was moved and then start from there. Usually, the source and target is just few seconds behind. So this is a very good option for a very minimal downtime kind of a solution, very low RPO. So you can achieve that using this. Usually the recovery time is also between 5 to 15 minutes. So once you want to do a test or cutover, it switches over very quickly. So this is a verbose slide that I want to leave you with a bit of a guidance that if you can use, if you can't use agents, that's where SMS is an option for you. If you are migrating physical servers, then SMS doesn't work, server migration service. Then Cloud Endure is one option. So you may use this as a metrics to decide what works for you. But if you're looking at the one single tool that does migration and DR, then and lowest skills, it's all fully automated, you can go for Cloud Endure. More information available here, but server migration service is very cost effective also. From a cost perspective, when you're using Cloud Endure, you're paying for those replication servers and the EBS volumes when it's replicated. In a way, it's cost effective. Like if you're doing a SQL Server migration, you're not paying for the SQL Server licenses on the AWS. You're just doing the block level replication. So it could be cost effective, but compared to server migration service, there is not. It's only AMIs that gets created in your account. So you can decide what works best based on your requirements. Yeah, I already talked about that. You can use marketplace products or PowerShell DSC. One more pattern we see with customers that they want to start afresh. They don't want sometimes to bring everything that they've got because they don't know what's there on the server. They're afraid of restarting that server. So they want to start fresh but they have a standard operating procedure or install instruction on how to deploy whatever they need on the target environment. So they launch a brand new AMI, an instance from a standard AMI, install any enterprise products that they need like antivirus or any other core software, install the application, and now they have an automated process to do this again and again. Image Builder, which was announced again earlier this week, helps you to do all this in an automated fashion more easily. So all that can become a different way of operating model where you're not worried about how you got there to a particular server configuration. You're confident that you can repeat it again and again because you built an automated cycle to install the application over the target AMI. So it can be in like a no patch environment. So .NET applications, you have a lot of choices in where you can deploy an AWS environment, and you can start small and then start refactoring. We find Windows container is a very helpful way in getting you towards those outcomes. So if you can containerize your application and migrate to Windows containers on ECS, that could be a good starting point for you to at least those strategic apps where you see a lot of change happening, where you are eventually going down a microservices route. Or in addition, we also see that it's the breadth and depth of the platform. While you've migrated what you wanted, but then maybe there's a lot of stress on the database. You wanted to add an Elastic Cache service. Maybe there's a search functionality you did not have and you want to use Amazon Elasticsearch. Maybe you want to add more push notifications to your app. So all those can start to like add up while you run your application once you've migrated the application to AWS. One cool feature again this week that was announced was GMS's support in ECS and EKS. So Windows Container is supported in both Amazon Elastic Container Service and Kubernetes Service, and GMS's feature allows you to even migrate AD integrated Windows application on containers. So definitely look at that if you have AD aware workloads. I think what I really want to take away, I expect you to take away from this slide is that depending on which method you use, there's still a lot of automation that you can do, and you should focus on, I think if you can do that, like maybe build or extend a CI/CD pipeline for application migration, that could give you more repeatable value. So there's a lot of stuff on how to build .NET code samples, and there's actually a good feature on the build.NET on AWS. You can subscribe. So any new announcement, any new blog, and any article, you'll get notification. So I encourage you to do that or share that with your colleagues. The tool that Rahul showed you on migrating ASP.NET website to Elastic Beanstalk, that's the third link there on the GitHub. So if you want to try it yourself, you can share that with your team as well and do it. So what I share that is that many times we come across customers who say, I want to do only the perfect thing on cloud and build cloud native applications. But I would say we see the pattern that don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. You are getting more benefits, higher performance, reliability, ability to innovate faster. So get started on the journey and you'll not be alone. We see that pattern quite commonly. A significant percentage of migrations are re-platform and re-host. So certainly recommend to look at that. There's more information on prescriptive migration guidance available. Yeah, so this is a very common topic we come across with our customers. You will know Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 will be reaching end of support, and that means you will not get security patches and you will run the compliance risk, and that is a big concern for a lot of customers because they have been running for over a decade applications on this OS. One option is, yes, you can buy an extended support like from Microsoft, but I believe that you're just stretching the inevitable because ultimately you're running on an OS that's not supported. So at some point you have to go and migrate. I think it's usually that refactoring is very difficult or time consuming or complex, and that's why you're not able to get there. And that's what we've heard. So we made it simpler for customers. This was, I think, released last year, where you can. There are two ways to do a migration. Upgrade, right? One is in-place upgrade, which is usually not recommended by Microsoft, but sometimes in AWS we say it's a two-way door. You can try it out. If it works for you, great. If not, then you have to do the migration. So what in-place upgrade this automation tool does is that if you have a Windows Server 2008 running and you use this tool, it will create an AMI from this, then launch an instance from that AMI, do an in-place upgrade of the OS by keeping your personal files and application files same, intact, and then bring up the instance and give it to you. Usually if you have to do it yourself, it's a very meticulous task. Every step of the way you have to monitor it and do it well. But if this gives you an automated way, single click way to get it there, now you have an application running on a newer OS, you can test it. Worst case, the application doesn't work, you didn't get much information, but now you have a data that what did not work. And best case, it works, now you have an older application running on a newer OS, you don't have to pay the extra insurance. But then there could be scenarios in between, like life happens, you could have either lost source code, COTS product, and this tool shows that it doesn't work, then what do you do? That's where we have launched a new offering from partner-led, ProServe-led offering from a patented technology which can, without refactoring your application code, it can help run the older applications on newer OS. So it's the win-win scenario where it didn't work. Like for example, it could be a SQL 2000 application. It will not, if you try to install SQL 2000 on 2012 or 2016, it would say its operating system is not supported. But using this tool, this technology, you can run SQL 2000 on a newer OS. So like that, if you have other application dependency that can be packaged, and and NAB from Australia, they are pursuing that for around 1200 applications that they have on Windows 2003 to repackage them, and then they have a set of 4500 applications on Windows 2008. So I'm sure there are a lot of applications you have that can fit into that. How it works is that it's a packaging technology. So you install this tool on the same OS where your application runs currently on a different instance, and it does, as you install the application, it identifies what are the dependencies of the application. For example, what registry keys it's dependent on, or what IP addresses that it's, maybe it has a database or some other network resource that it's trying to access. And then also it also supports runtime analysis of the application. And as a combination, it can repackage the application, create a redirection logic which comes in between, and whatever is not supported by OS, it makes intercepts those calls and makes it work for the application. So kind of making it independent of the operating system. It could be an iterative process, but still it's an option worth giving it a shot, and it's getting a lot of excitement since Sandy's announced it. Since it was announced this week, I think a lot of conversations on this already. So engage with a partner or ProServe, and that will help you leaving no app behind, whether it's older OS or new. There are a lot of partners. Again, a link there if you want to go read more about it. Last few things I want to leave you with is that you may also have desktop applications. For example, Windows Forms application. I was with a consulting firm before I joined AWS, and we've done many projects where we said, okay, if it's a thick client application, there's a lot of challenges already. You can't centrally manage it, you can't patch it, it depends on the end customer, user being online. And then if it's an end storefront app, how do you push the promotions? How do you create road shows? There's a lot of challenges in maintaining thick client application. And going from thick client to thin client is always a challenging process, multi-year project. But what if you could take that thick client application, and access it over a browser, scale it to users across the globe? That can be done in a matter of few days or less with AppStream. You take your application, as you install it on your desktop, same you install it on a fleet of on an EC2 server. There's an image builder process and a step-by-step guide. There is a short video link I've shared that walks you through that process. So what it does is you will install the application on an EC2 server, and it intercepts the frames of your application and sends it over encrypted pixel over the browser. So it's actually used a lot with MATLAB, CAD/CAM tools, oil and gas industries, a lot of products like that, and it can be used for like your IDE, Excel spreadsheet, Visio, you name it. Any desktop client application can be. This could be one option for you to modernize. And otherwise, if you need the full experience, then you can go for workspaces. So yeah, if you want to take that. So to conclude. We talked about CloudFormation a lot. I'd emphasize that it's really very powerful, and you should look at building more and more automation as you start your journey on AWS. That helps you scale fast and make changes with confidence. I think as developers, we are always confident that if I have a bug, I have a source control, I can go back, revert my code. But as infrastructure sysops engineers, haven't enjoyed that luxury typically. But now if you know, you can go back, like I added a F5 load balancer, and I want to replace that with application load balancer and see how it works. I can do that, and I know if it doesn't work, I'll recreate, I'll update the template like in version control and redeploy, and I'll have my environment. So it gives you a lot of power and flexibility. So we went through a lot. I know time was short. We tried to cover that. I think some of the best practices to recollect is like definitely plan for an automated landing zone, because that will help you scale fast. Consider rehost and replatform to unlock savings early. It positions you for modernization faster. There are a lot of tools, comprehensive set of tools across the entire migration lifecycle, from discovery to planning to migrate, and do it all together, and flexibility to pick and choose the tools of your choice as well. And always plan for tests and validation. No matter even if it's a rehost, there may be some tuning required based on the storage, networking that you have to take into account. There's a very comprehensive plan on how can we enable you to run large-scale migration. A lot of customers say, well, that's great. I've not done migration in like last 10 years, and I don't have people, I don't have the skills. How do I do that? We have packaged all our learnings of thousands of migration or data center migrations and created programs around that, which covers the training part, it covers the tools, it covers the partners in the ProServe enablement, as well as enabling training and skill building in your own teams, and bring it all together so that you can drive these large-scale migration yourself with confidence. And there's a lot of way to optimize cost. Either you start with that, or you just cost optimization should be just the way you operate on AWS. So you should see that downward curve as you build and migrate more applications on AWS. So with that, I'll leave you with these thoughts. Maybe go back, review, use a tool-based approach to see what you have in the environment, engage with an AWS team to see, or a partner to see how can you showcase business value of migrating those applications to AWS. Always start small, build the muscle. It takes a while, but it's important to like pick up an application that will help you learn something new. It will give you an artifact which is reusable, like a reference architecture, or it will provide you outputs to assumptions that you've made in your business case. So pick up something small that adds value, but do it right, so that then you can scale fast. And then you can always call a friend, AWS ProServe partner, a lot of people in the community who can help you in this journey. You don't have to start alone. So with that, I'll say thanks for your valuable time. Hope this was useful. Hope you migrate and scale large Windows applications on AWS. I know we are on Thursday. There are a lot of sessions that happened. I left this information in here so that if you want to go back to those videos or slide share, you can access those information. Thank you. And please, definitely leave survey feedback. That helps us to improve for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.